So we've seen how and why we need to declare our variables, and if we're going to be top-notch programmers, defining their data type as well. What we also need to now look at is the scope of a variable. So where does a variable live and where will it die? If you think of a fish, it will live in water, but it will die once it leaves the water. Now the scope of your variables is defined really at the point you declare them. So in our little example here, in the example scoping file, we've got 3 variables that have been defined within this sub-procedure called math example. The scope of those variables is actually just that procedure. We cannot make use of these variables outside of this procedure. They are declared at the beginning, they are used throughout the procedure. At the end of the procedure, so here we have end sub, they are discarded, they are thrown away, the memory is released. If we try to create another procedure that effectively tries to make use of those variables, so if I try to write out the value of x again, and then run that test, you'll find we get variable not defined, because it hasn't been defined within this procedure, therefore it doesn't exist. It can only be used within here. Now sometimes you do want variables to be used outside of a procedure. In order to do that, you must declare them at a much higher level. If we were to declare a variable here, so let's take our x, dim x as double, and declare it as a variable effectively at the top of the module. It must be after the first line of option explicit, but before you start defining any functions or procedures at all. Now this will still work. Answer 110. But because the scope of x is now outside of that procedure, x exists the whole time this module exists. So I could create a new procedure called test that uses x, and then test. And you see we get a 0, not an error, a 0, because x actually holds no value. Now there's nothing to stop me giving a value to x within here. I don't need to declare it again. It's been declared at a global level effectively for the module. X equals 67, then run my test. I get 67. Now when you declare variables up here at the module level, you sometimes see the word private. Rather than dim, it's the same result. So dim or private, a variable at the higher level, so at the module level, allows that variable to be available, to be accessed, to be used throughout the whole of this module. So any procedures, any functions within this module can make use of x. Now if we add further modules, x cannot be used in these other modules. So if I were to insert a new module, module 2, and try a similar thing, subtest2, message box x, try to run test2, I'll get a variable not defined because we've defined x, but that was in module 1. If I want x to be used in other modules within the same application, I need to change the private to public. Now when I go to module 2 and try to run test2, I get the 0 because it's not got a value, but I don't get an error because I can make use of it. And what I can do in here is give it a different value. So when I run test2, I get 98. So we can define variables in different places with different keywords, and that's really what defines their scope. Within a procedure or a function, if I use dim, then that variable only exists during the life of that statement, for that procedure, for that function. It's created, it's used, it's discarded. You could, in theory, try changing this dim to public, but it still won't allow it to leave the subroutine. So it's stuck within the boundary there. If I declare it at the top with either dim or private, then that variable, again I'll reset the project here because I've changed the declaration word, the variable is then available to be used by any procedure or function within that module. If I declare it using the word public, then it's available not just throughout this module, which is module 1, but throughout every single module in the current Excel workbook, so in the current application. So that's the scope of your variables. We've already seen how to declare them and define their data types. This now decides effectively the life of them. Where can they live and how long can they live for? The scope of a variable.